Well, welcome everybody to this seminar on truth and consequences. I'm Dr. Gordon Carkner, meta educator with UBC postgraduate students, an author and a blogger. Here's my PhD dissertation, a critical examination of Michel Foucault's moral self in dialogue with Charles Taylor. Thanks for joining us, and I hope this is an enlightening seminar for you. What is truth? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Quid est veritas? The primary lens through which many individuals interpret the world today is relativistic, subjective, what one might call anti-realist or anti-realist. Under this view, there is no truly real world outside my perceptions and interpretations, only a compilation of several different constructions by different actors and intellectuals. They often conflict and fight each other for dominance. But in this seminar, we want to defend the strong thesis that there is such a thing as truth, and that it greatly matters. It has consequences. We want to know the truth for its own sake, for its treasures of understanding about the human condition and our world, for its practical life benefits in mapping reality. Truth is both powerful and transformative, good for our mental, physical, and political health, great for overall wisdom, human wisdom. We naturally want to make sense of the world as a meaningful whole. Truth differs from perspectivalism. That's an important distinction. Humans are interpreting animals. Individual perspectives can be biased or prejudiced, but this does not mean truth itself is relative or merely subjective. We ought not to give up the debate and the ongoing pursuit of truth. The internet, of course, provides us with a plethora of opinions on many subjects, as well as extreme conspiracy theories. This can lead to societal fragmentation and tribalism, as we witness in the dark world of social media. The ideology of perspectivalism believes that no one can possess the truth. It means that we are destined to fight for our viewpoints in a pluralistic jungle, kind of a Darwinian concept of truth. And we can look to Hobbes, who held this all against all view of things. We want to begin to cut through the confusion. We want to begin to look at truth and correspondence. There are currently a variety of tests for truth: coherence, livability, historical reliability, scientific verifiability, and pragmatism. Does it work? But a good place to start is one of the oldest. It goes right back to Aristotle, and it's the most established and respected concept of truth, or theory of truth, called the correspondence theory. It offers a fundamental building block towards clarity and certainty. Language philosopher John Searle believes it to be quite viable, since correspondence is the background presupposition of all human language, all propositions. It is also fundamental to science. We seek to map physical reality as it is, not just how we imagine it. When we speak in daily discourse, we assume that we are saying something related to what is indeed the case. We seek to verify it through hard evidence and probability, or cross-checking our various witnesses. At the end of the day, why do we need truth? Are lies, fiction, myths, and fantasies enough to keep us going? And this is where correspondence theory helps us. Correspondence theory recognizes the bias or slant of my subjective perspective as the knower or world participant. Yet that doesn't automatically mean that it lacks credibility. Correspondence does not implode into the reductionism of perspectivalism. Realism is the background presupposition of much discourse, not just science. An important assumption for correspondence, meaning this: there is a real world and real people with whom I have dialogue and relationship, and I can come to know it truly and accurately. Perspectives represent varying degrees of success at capturing reality. We can respect the complexity of various interpretations, as in hermeneutics, but we cannot live well on lies, confusion, distortions, illusions, delusions, or bad scholarship, and it often ends up in a kind of fraud. They exploit people and promote injustice and oppression, even theft, as in Ponzi schemes. Lies lead us astray, make us slaves, as in propaganda under dictatorships. So I'm contesting that we should never give up on truth. We need truth like we need air, water, and food. Truth is the very foundation of our existence, our freedoms, our potency, our ability to choose as agents in the world. The more we grasp the truth, the better we will thrive. But in the background of our minds, often this question of truth and power comes up. Michel Foucault, in his middle period, wrote much about power knowledge, or how truth is enmeshed with power. Those in power want us to see them as benefactors and often deceive us. This was deeply insightful, but it became a dead end for him with the loss of agency, and he had to rethink his whole project. My PhD studied his ethics, his self, and his concept of freedom, which was the third part of his oeuvre. Can we speak truth to power and call for accountability from our leaders? This is a key dimension of any democracy, free market, or human rights. In this sense, truth is powerful. We never want to reduce the truth to power, on the other hand, or violence, as in empire ideology. Autocracies want to control the message, keep the people submissive, present government authorities as the savior. Truth can be an effective antidote to the abuse of power if managed well. As we know, sometimes it can end you some jail time. Some important qualifications or sensibilities here around the topic of truth. Truth itself must be distinguished from how we arrive at it, the effects truth has on individual persons, and our personal limitations in discerning it. Nuances here are very important. First category is ontology. That's speaking about metaphysical reality or the whole picture. Absolute, universal, objective, exclusive, eternally engaging, and one. Truth tests. Our approach to truth, epistemology or methodology, and understanding is influenced by culture, biology, political environment, and upbringing. These are some of our biases. We should be self-critical in our quest for truth and listen to others outside our tribe. This helps us better recognize it and strive towards objectivity in the spirit of humility, of course. Degree of conviction. This involves logical certainty, mathematical certainty, moral certainty, relevance, robustness, and plausibility. These categories are all vital at certain points of our discussion about truth, the context of various discourses. And then finally, limits of the knowing, believing, engaged, truth-seeking agent. This involves such variables as level of intelligence and education, background beliefs, gender, race, values, upbringing, mentor experiences, the influence of ideologies such as neo-Marxism. But this should not deter us from making truth claims, defending what we are convinced is truth, or scrutinizing the truth claims of others. This is foundational to dialogue and healthy public debate. At this point, I want to make the point that metaphysical objectivity is compatible with epistemological subjectivity. That's an important distinction. The worst intellectual move is when someone slips into the trap of metaphysical subjectivity or anti-realism, as we see with the postmodern Richard Rorty, where he says truth is what you can get away with. In some parts of academia, truth is seen as a construction, a mere construction. Reality is thought to be nothing more than an individual's creation, and it can get quite cynical at times. This is where another category is important to us, critical realism. Within correspondence theory, this lies midway between naive realism, I know the reality exactly as it is, and epistemological skepticism. I can never know anything objectively or with certainty. Critical realism means that we continue trying to get a more accurate perspective, better map of reality to get us closer to the truth. That is, credible verisimilitude. It allows for progress in our knowledge and the toughening of theories over time as scholarship and science grow. Remember the Galileo affair. We are often dealing in degrees of objectivity, probability, plausibility, and fitness. Not all beliefs or theories have equal veracity, or what we could say is certainty or truth weightiness. In both scholarship and science, we try to move towards the best explanation as judged by criteria such as parsimony, elegance, correspondence, and explanatory power. But honest scholarship says that we are also open to being corrected through later work and new experimental evidence, better data, or documents. For this idea of critical realism, I encourage you to look at Paul Allen's thoughtful video on the subject, or also look at Michael Polanyi's important book, Personal Knowledge. The significance of worldviews. How are these worldviews that frame our assumptions important in the discussion of truth? Well, as you know, there's no such thing as a view from nowhere. Every perspective is based on certain assumptions. Sir John Polkinghorne, an eminent Cambridge physicist and theologian, favors critical realism in both physics and theology. For him, religious believers can retain their presuppositions while comparing their views with competing claims. This truth game works well within a university campus debate, especially where there is mutual respect and a good moderator and proper decorum. In campus dialogue, even the best reasons for a faith conviction will impress some, but not everyone. But good evidence can offer a sign to the seeker, pointing them in a helpful, investigative direction. People often eventually realize they must stand behind their worldview, answer tough questions on internal contradictions. For example, how does human dignity and rights fit with philosophical materialism if we're nothing but the stuff of worms? How do we get this dignity that brings us to think about human rights and human dignity? Which worldview, religious or secular, makes best sense of the evidence? For example, human suffering. This work requires courage and openness and good dialogue. Seeing a problem from another worldview perspective can dramatically shift the conversation and add much insight. We scrutinize our worldview using criteria of unity, relevance, and coherence. I recommend James Sire's basic book called The Universe Next Door. Arthur Ohms also has a good book on Christian worldview. Given worldviews, let's look at science within a larger frame as we zoom out with British physicist Tom McLeish. He says this in one of his books: science becomes a moral and spiritual exercise in personal and corporate healing and flourishing. The embedding of the scientific imagination within a much larger narrative of human advancement towards the divine constitutes a modern echo of the narrative described by Anselm and Grosseteste in their own times, but emerging within the new experimental program of Enlightenment science. I recommend his books, The Poetry and Music of Science, and also Faith and Wisdom in Science. He looks at science from a larger worldview perspective, and it changes a lot. Now we move to the idea of faith and reason. How do we see the relationship between a credible faith, reason, and truth? These are some of the topics we think about. What is responsible Christian faith, and how do we see faith and reason in regard to truth? In light of our quest to understand truth, its fruitfulness, and its genius, what constitutes responsible, thoughtful Christian faith? The truths of faith, non-trivial truths about God, humanity, and the world, should never be seen as mere stepping stones built upon the conclusions of reason alone. But we want to emphasize, reason is vital to faith. So we'll talk about these three topics: faith, revelation, and reason. These are important distinctions. Faith flourishes in a healthy engagement with reason, as we have demonstrated in our YouTube seminar, Can We Make Peace Between Faith and Reason? The grounds of faith are founded in God's revelation to humanity, his great speech acts in creation, scripture, and incarnation. These epiphanies offer breakthrough insight to the Judeo-Christian story. It contains accessible public truth for all to examine, as Leslie Newbigin says. Revelation offers much enrichment to human reason. Transcendent sources offer wisdom in the use of reason. Having a faith does not stretch the shape of truth in an unnatural direction. It rather expands, strengthens, and clarifies what people naturally desire to know about themselves and their world. That is, towards human flourishing. And finally, reason helps us understand more deeply the assumptions and identity conditions of the Christian faith, making it more resilient, relevant, and transformative. This is what happens in apologetics. Reason helps us to interpret the tradition handed down through Scripture and the Church, boosting our own personal experience of God. This is the field of theology. So in this light, in this dialogue between faith, revelation, and reason, you can see how they help each other in a healthy, robust faith. We want to say, never stop thinking. And for a good example of this kind of thoughtful engagement between faith and reason, I recommend the Cogent book by Alistair McGrath, A Fine-Tuned Universe. And on apologetics, a fresh look from a Cambridge University graduate, Sarah McLaughlin, Confronting Christianity, 12 Hard Questions for the World's Largest Religion. This shows how faith, reason, and revelation work together. I want to say that at the end of the day, faith is a rational step into the light, not a blind leap into the dark, which many stereotype it to be. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I came into the world to bear witness to the truth. What does he mean by this? Is it reasonable to follow him and trust his claim to offer transcendent truth, to in some sense be the truth? Faith is certainty in the direction of, but sometimes beyond the evidence. It's a journey. According to a long tradition of weighty Christian apologetics, we are assured that faith is neither irrational nor anti-rational. Faith involves both top-down revelation and bottom-up inquiry, scientific reason, historical verifiability, philosophical soundness. Faith is not a blind leap in the dark without or against the evidence. It must be believable, coherent, make sense of life, society, and the world. At its core, the Christian faith is based on the redemptive life, death, and resurrection of Jesus the Christ. Correspondence theory and critical realism apply in a robust fashion here. So grappling with the Christian faith, its meaning and its impact on life will always involve rigorous intellectual investigation and personal reflection. I recommend this book by George Marsden, The Outrageous Idea of Christian Scholarship. And if you want to see some of our lectures, we post them on the UBC Graduate and Faculty Christian Forum website. This is a vital part of the cutting edge of faith amidst the developments in theology and Christian philosophy. Eminent Notre Dame philosopher Alvin Plantinga, in his book, Knowledge and Christian Belief, shows how truth plus warrant or very firm belief are the real keys to knowledge. That is, knowledgeable belief. And that's a complex metaphor, but really helpful if you want to look into that. So again, with worldview assumptions, how do we help discern the truth weight or plausibility of our position? Scientists are familiar with evaluating their theories through multiple lines of criteria. For example, prominent South African mathematician George Ellis uses 5 standards for strong scientific theories: simplicity, beauty, accuracy in prediction, verifiability, and explanatory power. That is, a capacity for giving the most adequate account of available data. Cambridge University philosopher of science, Ernest McMullen, also a champion of Christian critical realism, values the following criteria: predictive accuracy, internal coherence, external consistency, unifying power, fertility, and simplicity. These criteria are exceedingly helpful for mapping reality. At the end of the day, worldviews offer a map of the whole, answering such questions as what is ultimate, what is a human, the character of the natural world, the meaning of life, and the grounds for morality. Such a hermeneutical or interpretive map situates the visible world within a larger, transcendent whole. Truth seekers are encouraged to think both ontologically and epistemologically, building the imagination in healthy ways. Ironically, we all have a metaphysical perspective involving faith, even the infamous new atheists. And finally, Christian truth and philosophy. We want to say that no truth or reason is expected to contradict the truths of faith. For example, the 3 laws of logic: non-contradiction, excluded middle, and the principle of identity. I discovered this in my first year of graduate school. I'm very happy to do that. In this sense, philosophy is compatible with biblical faith. Currently, there is a virtual renaissance in Christian philosophy scholarship in the Anglo-American world, says Alvin Flanagan. Truth from a Christian perspective is an invitational absolute. It applies to all people, all times, everywhere. It's objective, it's true regardless of who believes or doesn't believe it. It's eternally engaging, never exhausted, unified and systematic, not self-contradictory, while containing paradoxes. An end in itself, not just a pragmatic means to an end. This is a bold statement of the rigor of Christian truth from Thomas Aquinas, which was mediated to me through my mentor in Chicago, Norman Geisler. So one can unashamedly believe Christianity as truth and still engage in argument and evidence both for and against. That is what worldview dialogue is all about, after all. The Christian religion is not reducible to reason, but we can use reason to defend the faith's plausibility, integrity, and relevance. We can also ask thought-provoking questions of others. Christian faith is at present a very creative interlocutor for modern philosophy. So what are our conclusions from this discussion? Thanks for joining us. This has been a great time to think together. We have discovered that truth is vital, fruitful, and engaging. It's not merely something we invent or construct out of self-interest. The stakes are too high for that. Truth has a claim on us and our choices. Correspondence theory and critical realism have helped us understand some of its nuances. It's a wonderful, lifelong pursuit to move closer to the truth using critical thinking, research, dialogue, and reflection. And that I would attest to that myself. Christian truth is compatible with scientific, historical, and philosophical truth claims. Truth is very worthwhile. It can change lives for the better. Worldviews assist us in the task of examining truth claims and assumptions. And finally, we need more commitment to the truth in our culture to avoid misrepresentation, corruption, injustice, and fraud. It is a boon for society, academia, for peacemaking and international relations. So my conclusion is overall, never give up on the truth. Tell the truth, live into the truth. Here's some bibliography, some strategic resources on this topic at various levels, depending on what your interests are. Well, that's it for our seminar. Thank you very much for joining us. You see a little bit of Oxford University in the background. That rotunda is where I did a lot of my PhD research and study. Wore out one of the chairs in that beautiful library. And thanks very much for joining us. This has been a great time together to think about truth and consequences. All the best.